Welcome to the second day of our inaugural MHH conference. It's lovely to see you all. We've got some new faces today, so I will reiterate thanks to our funders, MGS Forums Fund, who have been supported by the National Lottery, with thanks to National Lottery players. And thank you to our sponsors, to Spotify and Smartify and Highland Tourism. We had a really lovely afternoon yesterday, and we had some really good discussions to start with, and then those of us who went to Velocity afterwards were treated to dinner and a fantastic film, Dukas, which I recommend that if you get a chance to see it, that you definitely do. It's a very moving film on Benbecula with archive footage, so it's definitely worth a wee look if you get a chance. Yesterday, a colleague of mine remarked on the change in demographics in the last sort of 20 years of having gone to Highland Forum meetings long ago, and remarked on the youthfulness of the sector and how wonderful it is to see that, and that led on to a conversation of actually the amount now of paid members of staff that we have in the sector compared to even 10 years ago, which is really encouraging as to where the sector is sitting, that through kind of challenging years we've still been able to really up our game and support a new workforce in the Highlands, and it definitely speaks of like how well the sector is doing, and also the many skills and knowledge that are in the sector, both from our experienced cohort and younger members. So again, as I said yesterday, this conference, really our main aim is to get together to meet in person and to collaborate, share knowledge, and find out what skills we can glean from each other. So my challenge for this coffee breaks and lunchtime is to find somebody who you do not know and strike up a conversation with them and see where that leads. I know that is tough for us shy retiring Highlanders, but that is my challenge. Just say hello to somebody new. I have a couple of housekeeping things. Thank you, Nicola. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, there is no expected fire alarm. If there is a fire alarm, then head to that door over in the left-hand corner and leave the building quietly and slowly. Muster at the front steps. The toilets are at the back. You go out the yellow door, turn left, and turn left again. You will find the toilets there. There's also a cloakroom at the fire exit, so if any of you want to dump some stuff over there, then please do. I also have to point out our fantastic tables of people doing things over there, including Beehive, are here, so please do speak to Alex at Beehive. He doesn't have Beehive on his table, he's got thank you. So do say hello to him and everyone else, have interesting conversations with them. Without further ado, I will leave you now to our next panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Is that on yet? Is it on? Can you hear me? I have switched it. Oh, not all the way. That's a lesson for us all this morning. Take a seat. Will you come up here? So thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. My name is Tamsin Russell, and I'm really delighted to be here on the panel to talk about workforce. My role in the sector is with the Museums Association, and for those of you that don't know who we are, we're the sector body for people that work with and in museums. And that with is really important, so that with is with volunteers, freelancers and our communities. My role specifically is focused on funding, research, ethics, as well as professional development and career support and progression, which is why I'm looking forward to learning from these three people when we talk about a variety of things. The format of today's panel is that I'm going to ask some pre-prepared questions following the introductions from the three people to my left, and then I want to hand over to all of you to ask questions. There's no such thing as a silly question. There isn't an opportunity, I think, as rich as this, really, to share and learn from everybody in the room. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over and ask each of our panellists to introduce themselves, give a little bit of context about their organisation, and then I'll start asking some questions on your behalf before handing over to you to ask the really nitty-gritty questions. So please put your thinking hats on. So, David, who are you?
Do I want to turn this on?
And all the way is my learn today.
I think that's working then, yeah. Okay. So hello everybody, thank you very much for inviting me along today. My name is David Bell. I'm actually here today because I am a member of something called the Volunteer Organisers Network. And I'll call out VON from now on because everyone knows what they're called.
Three-letter acronym.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, an acronym. So VON. VON are a peer-to-peer support group supporting anyone in Scotland who works with volunteers in the heritage sector. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We've been working exclusively online, and we're going to continue to do that for the next year or so. We're also working very closely with the Make the Mark campaign, and that's a campaign to increase diversity and inclusion amongst Scottish heritage volunteers. If you've not got involved, so I know some organisations here may be part of the Make the Mark campaign, it's free to join the campaign, and as well as the usual sort of newsletters and social media and events, one thing that I found really useful is that they have a recruitment portal. And speaking from the Mining Museum's point of view, that portal has made a really big difference in the demographics of our volunteer group. It's attracted a lot of younger students or recently graduated people looking for a career in heritage and looking for some practical experience. So Make the Mark's well worth looking into and finding out about and seeing if it would be useful for your organisation. In terms of VON, we run a series of case studies during the course of the year, very similar to the excellent presentations that we had yesterday afternoon at the end of the day. So we will find a presenter who can talk about a particular project or a particular topic relating to heritage volunteering. They will talk for 15-20 minutes, then there will be question and answer and a general discussion for the rest of the session. We also do something else that you'll all be very familiar with by the sound of things. We have coffee mornings every other month. And I think, is it called a conversation cafe? Or just the cafe?
Heritage Cafe.
Heritage Cafe, okay. So, very similar to that. We will go around the group and find out what the pressing issues are at the moment. We will have maybe breakout rooms, discussion around particular topics, and then we'll come back at the end. We found those really useful way of networking and getting to know people. Again, as you'll know, if you're working on Zoom, working online, the geographical spread is so much better. And we've had people participating in coffee mornings and case studies from all around Scotland. What's a bit frustrating is that our VON members, our sort of organising group, are still really central belt. And so you probably know what's coming next. I'd recommend. And we'd love to have more perspective from the Highland and some Highland voices involved in the VON group. It's not onerous. We meet online once a month and we discuss future case studies, presentations, try to find some speakers, etc. And then obviously the events themselves, it would be great if you could, if members turn up and support those events. That's selling over. But it'd be great. Just get in touch with me or go online and look for the Voluntary Organisers Network and find out more. I think some of our older case studies are on YouTube. In my day job, I'm Assistant Curator at the National Mining Museum. But if I start talking about that now, then that's going to be far too long. So I'm going to pass over now, and thank you very much.
Thank you. My name's Ian Leith, and I'm here representing the Wick Heritage Society. I have one or two other hats as well that are relative to what's done today, but I'm just tucking them away and gathering the information. The Wick Society, which is now 50 years old, could you believe? And you'll recognise, of course, that I've not quite been there all that time, but 50 years old last year. And the Wick Society is the sort of overarching body, charitable body, which looks after what I like to call 4 different collections. We've got the Wick Heritage Centre Museum, which is basically a series of artefacts and displays looking at and providing information on specifically and largely about the herring fishing industry, which was big in Wick. Wick was called the herring capital of Europe. We still don't know whether we penned that ourselves or whether that was given to us, but nonetheless, it was pretty busy at that time. So the museum kind of looks at that aspect of it. We also have then a second collection called the Johnston Photographic Collection, which I'm sure some of you may be aware of, and that's over 100 years of photographs from the Johnston family from over 3 generations. And we've got something like 40,000 of them now online, digitised from the original glass plates, and that's a huge collection and vitally important in terms of a sort of pictorial social history. That's 2 sections. We've got boats, as you might imagine in Wick. We've got boats. Some of them float. One in particular called the Isabella Fortuna, which goes out on a regular basis every summer, and it's a reconditioned, if that's the right word to use, Fifey fishing boat. But we have other ones, and we've got some that don't go in the water because they've got holes in them, basically. And that's the three sections. And then the 4th section is our most recent, but probably at the moment maybe our most successful in some respects, is what's called Wick Voices, and it's our oral history project, which started just in 2016, I think, but it's kind of taken off, and it's all the recordings are online, so they're free to view, free to listen to. Just simply ask Mr. Google for Wick Voices, and he'll take you there. 370 recordings online now, I think, and we're averaging around about 1,000 to 1,200 listens every week, because the wonders of technology, you can check these things. So immensely successful, I think. Why not blow our own trumpet for a wee while? What else have I got to talk about?
You just need to pass over your microphone to the lovely Siobhan, and then we'll carry on.
Lovely Siobhan.
I don't think I've ever been called the lovely Siobhan.
It will be your name going forward.
I approve. Hi, I'm Siobhan Beatson, or the lovely Siobhan. What a name badge now. I am the manager of Ullapool Museum, and have also on the board of MHH, is probably why I got this gig. And I'm here to talk about how our workforce has changed over the past maybe 5 years. So we're at Ullapool Museum. We are quite nicely situated in the North Coast 500 to get all the camper vans and tourists from that. We are also housed in a Grade A listed Thomas Telford Parliamentary Church, which is an absolute wonder and a headache all in one little nice package. We are a particularly small museum, being the church, and we have started to expand digitally because we are aware of our restrictions through space. So recently we've started doing outreach programmes, and our biggest one that most people might have heard of is the Lost Envelope Project, which is a rather large archaeology project that we've been undertaking over the last years, which is coming to a close imminently for the first phase, which has had a significant amount of digital outreach through Minecraft and volunteer archaeologists, community support and all that sort of stuff. So that's probably what we're best known for at the moment. We're very small. We'll probably get about 7,000 to 9,000 visitors a year, and I work on a relatively small operating budget of about 50 to 60,000. However, there's a question mark over that over the last couple of years with COVID, trying to get an accurate depiction, and that's not the easiest just now. And we only have 3 members of staff. And there's myself, who is the only permanent member at the moment, and our collections assistant. And recently we have just added to our ranks marketing and events assistant as well. So just the 3 of us and a lot of volunteers. So that's our demographic at the moment.
Fantastic. Keep the microphones and we'll come to you for the first question. But what I think is really important is hearing the context and the scale of the different museums that are within this space. Too often I think we hear about case studies around really large, well-resourced organisations, and everyone's then meant something. I often feel guilty that I'm not being able to deliver to those starry heights. So if there's any projects or any challenges that resonate from what we're going to be talking about now, then make sure that you tap these 3 guys up over tea break or lunch to get their more helpful hints. So, first question to you, lovely Siobhan, is, so how is your workforce changing? So you've alluded that you've moved from having solely volunteers-ish to more paid members of staff. Any other changes?
So I think probably most people would have a similar kind of situation that we had, especially over COVID, where we lost a lot of our volunteers due to them being shielding or not wanting to risk coming out, and which was perfectly acceptable. And I think there's a kind of general consensus that we've not quite recouped the numbers that we had before. Our main difference is we went from an organisation with 1 member of staff and 1 freelance coordinator and maybe about 50 to 60 volunteers to 3 members of staff and about 15 to 20 volunteers. We lost, and we've not recouped that. So there's been a concerted effort within our ranks to say, well, we're unlikely to be able to bring these people back, so how do we make up for that loss? And the way we thought it would be best for that is to actually employ more staff to take on parts of the business that we're getting away from, is one which being our collection. I would assume there's probably people who resonate quite well with our situation, was that the collection had been there, it was in the store and it just existed, and it was very rarely looked at or potentially even properly catalogued. So the bringing in of a very specific role as a collections assistant meant that now a year later we have a very good understanding of what is in our stores. We have ideas on how to be able to utilise our objects, and we are then able to use them for our own benefit through marketing and through other projects. Even this week we had the National Museums of Scotland up to looking at the collections, which would only be possible because of our collections assistant who's done the work in looking them out and sorting it. So it's not necessarily going to be for everybody, but for us, the employing of staff, giving opportunities to young people within the community to work within the community and not lose them to Inverness or Glasgow or Edinburgh, then that works both on a local economic level and on a museum personal level and a capacity within the museum itself.
Wonderful, thank you. So, passing the microphone on to Ian, do you want to sort of reflect on how your workforce is changing at the Wick Society, and also any other current challenges?
Well, so on, yes. Does it work?
Yes.
Reiterate what Siobhan has said about COVID. We lost quite a lot of volunteers. The Wick Society is a completely voluntary run organisation. We don't have any paid staff, much to some people's disappointment, I think. But nonetheless, we are quite well blessed with the numbers of volunteers we have, because we've got these 4 different areas. I think we can probably count somewhere in the region of about 80 volunteers across the whole organisation. But they come and go at a rapid rate, and that's part of our problem, really, is that they take with them when they leave the skills and the knowledge that they have, because we don't have people employed with specific skills. So therefore, if so-and-so's joined us one year and has great skills, and they're gone the next year, then it's a real challenge. And one of the things we've been talking about, and we talked about here yesterday, is this desperate need for some succession planning, so that we actually look to the future and see where we're possibly going to go. Succession is obviously important for us all. I would say that the planning element is also vitally important. Sometimes I think museums, and I speak for our own, that we don't actually do a lot of planning. It kind of happens because it's been happening that way for 50 years, so therefore that's the way it happens. So I think our big challenges in terms of volunteers is retaining the right ones and retaining the skills that they have when they disappear from us.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you want to pass it over to David? The question for you, sort of similarly, but specifically about volunteers, is around how do you get the best out of volunteers?
Okay, it sounds really simple, but I think my starting point is you really need to get to know your volunteers. And it's easier in some circumstances than others, because sometimes you might be managing volunteers that you don't actually see on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. They might be working somewhere else. To give you a little bit of context, in terms of the Mining Museum, our collections team has myself and my manager, Nicola, and that's it. And we've got quite a large collection. We've got 165,000-ish objects, and they vary from pieces of industrial equipment like coal cutters and hydraulic roof supports to smaller items. Obviously, people think of lamps and helmets, clothing, etc. But because we're also looking at the communities that grew up around mining industry, then we've also got a lot of domestic and social items in our collection. And if it was just me and Nicola, we would never get anything done. We've got 20 volunteers. They come in 1 day a week, Monday to Thursday, and we grind to a halt without them. And we're fortunate in getting to know them because they all work in the same building and most of the time in the same room as us. So it's for us, and for me in particular, once going through the recruitment process and induction and initial training, it's building up a rapport, getting to know them as much as I can, and particularly getting to know their motivation. Why did they decide they wanted to be part of our organisation? And each individual volunteer has got their own motivation. Sometimes it's a retired person who's got an interest in social history or just local history. Sometimes it's a younger person who's interested in a career in heritage and in museum collections and wants to build practical experience. And again, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but I would really emphasise that in Edinburgh we consider ourselves a smaller museum. I know we've probably got more staff than yourselves sort of here, so here I feel like we're a little big museum, but when I'm comparing. But a real advantage of a small museum is that your volunteers get their hands dirty, they get involved, they have to learn how to accession and package and locate items and research. And that's really great, and that's something that you don't get with the bigger museums, and it's a really good selling point if you're trying to recruit volunteers, especially if you're trying to recruit younger volunteers, not retired necessarily. Bear with me, because I've got a tendency to waffle a wee bit, so I need to get my focus back.
This is what I'm here, David.
Thank you very much. Stop me waffling. Right, okay, I've got my notes, it's fine. Get to know them, get to know their motivation, and then pick, if you've got the luxury of doing so, picking tasks that work for them and work for their skills. Increasingly with us, tasks are becoming computer-based. You know, we use a collections database, so we're recording individual items that we're accessioning, we're doing a little bit of research around them, we're putting their location in. So computer skills are becoming increasingly important, but we've still got quite a few volunteers that don't use computers, and we've got the luxury of being able to have them do different activities, different sort of research activities, etc. But it's finding out, you know, like I said, their motivation, and then picking tasks and picking a program or a development plan for them sometimes that work for them. And accepting the fact that if it's a younger volunteer, they're probably, and maybe hopefully, only going to be with you for 6 months, because the skills they've picked up has improved their CV and enabled them to get a job in the profession. That's fantastic when that works. And equally, when we're looking at our older volunteers, our retention is really good. They tend to want to stay, which is great because they can get involved in some of our longer term projects that we know are going to last 2, 3, 4. I'm working on a maps and plans project, and it's been 8 years, and I'm not quite halfway through, so I do know what long-term projects are like. The other side of it, I think, for me, is getting the best out of volunteers, is making sure that there's a social aspect to it. So I'll very quickly run down. I mean, we've got our usual things that we get discount in the cafe and discount in the shop for our volunteers, but we also make sure we have an away day for staff and volunteers once a year. So we hire a minibus, we go off to another heritage site for the day, and we provide lunch. That's really important for our organisation because our volunteers come in 1 day a week, so they only meet volunteers in that day. And when we have these social events, they're meeting volunteers from the other days of the week. They're getting to know other people, and they always come back commenting on, oh, it was lovely to meet so-and-so, I didn't know them before, and now I know they volunteer on a Wednesday, and we had a good old natter. We have a Christmas quiz, and a sort of tea party, I suppose you'd call it. Which again is just another straightforward, simple way of sort of coming together and just celebrating with the volunteers. What else do we have? I mean, we have informal things. We or other things such as if there's an exhibition opening at our museum, then the volunteers automatically get an invite and usually take up on it, and they've got a real interest in sort of the running of the museum and how it works. And I think I'll leave it there. I just think that's that key point. Get to know your volunteer. Get to know why they're there, and then help make it work both for them and the volunteer.
Fantastic. Well, fully on. Your 2-question warning. So I'm going to ask Ian a question and then Siobhan, and then it's over to you. So please start thinking about what you would like to ask them. And we're going to finish promptly at 15:15. So Ian, the question I want to ask from you, and it comes from what you were saying about the retention challenge and sort of the ebb and flow of volunteers. So how can heritage be made more relevant to try and attract either visitors or people that engage with the collection or volunteers to support the work that you do at the Society?
Yes, well, I've thought quite a lot about how we attract more people into our museum, because we're like you on the North Coast 500, and people come by default almost sometimes in terms of the museum. But it's the local people that are not necessarily turning out to support the museum, and that I think is where the challenge is. And with another hat I have on, I'm a trustee of the Scottish Civic Trust, and we're working on a project called Diverse Heritage at the moment, and I think that's a great word in terms of heritage, is diversity. I think we're in danger sometimes of providing services that sort of one size fits all. We've got to look at how we engage with different demographics, different parts of the community, and provide heritage-related materials, programs that fit what they want, rather than here's come in and see what the museum's got. Let's see what it is that you would like to see and how we could refocus on some of that. There's some great objects in the museum that could tell a great story, but that story is maybe not always told in a more creative or diverse way. So to me, diverse heritage, I think, is a key phrase for me at the moment in terms of both volunteers, like David says, getting to know what they want to do, but also that potential audience that's out there. Let's see what they actually want as well.
Thank you, Ian. I think the sometimes one of the challenges is knowing who those people are and how to then engage with them. So I'm happy to have conversations about that later on. Last question, Siobhan, before we come over to you guys, is, I'll just look at my notes. So Ian, what's your experience of having to support your workforce go through sort of change? So you're sort of, I say fairly new in the role. You can be in an organisation for 55 years and still be a newbie, can't you, in our sector? So you are still fairly new in your role. So what's your experience having come in and then trying to do something different with the organisation?
I think it is a challenging situation to move into, because especially when you're trying to bring in a perspective that not everybody can necessarily see. Volunteers, by their very nature, don't see the background day-to-day organisation of running a museum, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that can sometimes blind them to the struggles and to some of the challenges that arise. I found personally our biggest, I wouldn't necessarily issue, a little bit more of a challenge, is to bring everybody on board, and that really takes a lot of imagination and communication and really kind of foresight to see where those challenges are going to be, especially if you're trying to challenge really deep ingrained ideologies within, probably that are quite similar to most volunteer established museums instead of professional established museums. We see ourselves on this this journey from a kind of hobby museum, which we started out as 30 years ago, to a professional organisation that is accredited, that has professional development, that has policies and procedures that we can follow to make sure it's a better working environment for everybody. And I think that's something that is part of our process, and that the change that we're making is making it a stable working environment and giving both the volunteers a sense of security and the staff a sense of security, and making sure that they are put first before we start thinking about collections, before we start thinking about outreach, and before we think about how we engage with the public. At the end of the day, we are an organisation that has to employ, whether it's volunteers or staff, and their well-being has to be put first. And that was probably not always the case, and that's the biggest change. And it's really difficult to do when people don't necessarily think of themselves as needing well, especially volunteers, because they don't see themselves with the same rights as members of staff would. So when you say, no, you have these rights, and you should be feeling safe and looked after, then they weirdly kind of push back a little bit, because they don't feel as if they've earned it, where most of them have more than earned it. So this transition into a kind of professional organisation with structures is where we're heading, and I think probably most museums are on that route at somewhere at various different points. And you just need to make sure you're bringing everybody with you and you're not leaving them behind. And I think as long as everybody can see where the end goal is and everybody's following perfectly, then you're going to have a happy workplace and a happy museum, which then leads to a much more productive workplace, in my opinion.
Brilliant, thank you. Just a handy adage: for every 10 years an organisation has been in existence, it takes a year to change the culture. If your organisation has been in existence for 30 years, as a minimum it will take 3 years to get to where you want to be when you first got in. So for those of you thinking, oh my god, it's taking ages, it could take way longer than you anticipate. So thank you so much. We're still going to hear from you, but I do want to open up to the audience, and there's already a question at the back. So that everyone can hear all the questions, I'm going to come here into the audience. So, sir, could you direct your question either to the single member or the whole panel?
Very simple questions. You asked three at the same time. How do you involve schools? What are you doing about the garret? And how do you avoid, I was recently at Lewes Castle, the touristification of the museum? Because Newcastle, the exhibition, overwhelmed with visitors.
Brilliant. So schools, Gaelic, touristification. Say that quickly. Who would like to go first?
Well, we don't have a problem with Gaelic in Caithness because we don't speak it. So, but I understand what you're saying. But specific exhibitions, people flock to them and not look at the rest of the museum. Maybe we don't do a lot of specific exhibitions, but we did one last year on John Nicholson, the sculptor, and yes, the footfall increased, but not necessarily across the museums.
So with the question of Gaelic, we addressed this and started thinking of putting in a Gaelic language plan for the next couple of years. Last year we actually had a Gaelic officer that was employed with us, and that was one of the ones that we decided that's not a volunteer position because it's a lot of responsibility, it's a lot of knowledge, and at that point none of our volunteers are actually fluent Gaelic speakers. So that was one of the posts that we decided. But like all posts, from most posts within the museums, these are temporary because you have to align them up to project funding. So I'm still the only permanent member of staff. All my other ones are temporary, and the Gaelic Medium one, Gaelic Medium Museum assistant, was also temporary, and they finished up last year.
Schools, was it sort of involving schools with your museum? So obviously I'm going to come across as a sort of someone from a big museum now, sadly, because we've got an education officer, and she's really excellent. She's built up really good contacts with our local schools, so they regularly come in to different projects, etc., and to openings of exhibitions. In terms of exhibitions, we've got a bit of a problem in the sense that our main buildings are an old industrial site. They're an old colliery. They weren't designed to be a museum, and they weren't designed to be an exhibition space. So we have a temporary exhibition space outside of our galleries. It has a sloping floor. It has two outside walls that aren't insulated. So if you put anything, paintings, banners, whatever, up against the wall, and it's not the right time of year, we have to be going in 2 times a week to make sure things aren't getting wet, to make sure things haven't fell off the wall because of the damp. So we are really frustrated by the fact that we can't have as many temporary rotating exhibitions as we'd like because of the physical buildings. The Gaelic thing is really interesting because it's been spoken about a lot over the past few days, and obviously I'm from right down south in Edinburgh, and Gaelic doesn't seem to be much of a talking point down there. I'd love someone to convince me that we should be covering the whole of Scotland with this issue, and suggesting that maybe some of our signage at our museum should be in Gaelic, because I'd be very positive about that personally, and I could take that back to our museum. Yeah.
We've got another question in the audience, so over to you. And there's 2 more hands up, but over to you first.
My question is specifically actually for Ian. Just, you mentioned the exhibitions being quite popular in comparison to the museums people visited, and your previous comment was touching on communities in the area not maybe showing as much support, as you would maybe like. I'm just kind of curious to know, how much you kind of report who and where these people are coming from who visit the exhibitions, and is that your actual local community that's coming to experience that, and obviously they would be supporting the museum, but in the way that they want and in the content they'd like to engage with. So I'm just kind of curious. I think the exhibition side of things.
Yeah, that particular exhibition I talked about was very much about a local man, a local sculptor, John Nicholson. So there was quite a good local input into that in terms of people coming in to see the exhibition. But I think there's a perception, maybe in the Wick anyway. But we've seen the museum anyway, so we'll not need to do that. We'll just come and see this new exhibition. So it's a challenge. How do we know whether they went into the exhibition or the museum? Well, we know that they didn't go around the museum because they just simply went up the stairs to see the exhibition. We know where everybody's coming from because we are obliged to get people to sign in. So we do have a note of where people are coming from. But yeah, does that answer what we?
Yeah, it does. It largely is because local people coming to see something that's speaks to them. And is there additional charge for that exhibition compared to museum entry? Larger.
No, there's no separate charge. I mean, we do as a museum, we do make an entry charge, and that's where most of our funding and income comes from. But even if they were coming for the exhibition, they had to pay their £5 anyway. So they may not have had the benefit of the museum, but we had the benefit of their £5.
I think there's a question, Joe. I think Joe had a question, and then there was another question over there. And, yes, the lovely Vanessa. And also at front, we've got 3 more, and then we're going to be wrapping up. I think that's about time. So, Joe, Vanessa. Is it Liz? I've made this up. It is Liz.
This is a question that I'd be interested to hear from the whole panel on. I've heard the opinion expressed that if you seek to get more paid staff in your museum, that this will decrease the number of volunteers because they will be demotivated and feel devalued, and overall, therefore, having more paid staff will reduce your capacity. And I just wondered if the panel would like to speak to this opinion, which incidentally I don't know.
I've also heard that same statement made, and I think there is an element of it because we found that the more we increased the workforce, there didn't feel as much of a need for certain volunteers, and they didn't feel that they were required as much. But I think what we actually did in the long run was reassess who was volunteering and their kind of internal struggle of whether they needed to crisis manage. And we found out that volunteers that were doing things and then left didn't actually want to be doing the things they were doing, and they were just doing it because nobody else was doing it. So while they did leave that post and didn't take up more once the staff members in place, it gave them the freedom to reduce their hours. It gave them the freedom to pursue something that they felt was more towards their own interests, instead of having to be obligated to take up a split role, which I think we definitely had that issue. So, yes, but in a good way that it actually turned into a positive in the end, if that makes sense.
Yes, is the answer, really. As a completely voluntary organisation, some of us have raised the issue of possibly having some paid staff because we could do with the museum's manager, curator, whatever. That's the perception of some of us. But the last time it was raised as a possibility, somebody on the board stood up and said, "We're not having that because they might tell us what to do."
From our point of view, all our volunteers, bar maybe 1 or 2 who work on the sort of estate side of things, but all our volunteers work in collections. If a position came up in the collections team for another assistant curator, say, we would definitely have some volunteers initiate a discussion with us to say, should I apply for this? And we'd have an honest discussion with them to say yes, but you might lack a little bit of experience in a particular area, you know, you might want to build that up, etc. But we'd definitely be encouraging, and I think in terms of demotivating other staff, other volunteers, I don't see that working with us. We've got a never-ending to-do list of jobs for our volunteers to do, and they all know why they're doing that job, why it's going to help the museum, and a lot of them, like I said, aren't looking for a job. They're retired anyway. And just on a personal note, and I won't go through the boring background to this, but I started at the Mining Museum as a volunteer, and I was that situation happened to me. And I had a discussion with the curator at the time, and she was encouraging and said, yeah, I think you should apply. And so I'm still there 10 years later, you know. So yeah, I don't think it would necessarily demotivate volunteers. And I think there are probably other issues going on at an organisation if that happened.
Wonderful. Vanessa?
My question is specifically for Siobhan and Julia herself. So I'm curious to know whether sort of positions, whether they're permanent or short-term contract roles, what sort of things, duties they're performing, and how they're being funded.
So at the moment, we have just taken on a marketing and events assistant, and they're being funded by Highland Lottery Fund as a kind of business sustainability fund we put in that was to look at 3 different points within the business: the marketing, the kind of current appeal of the museum, and some and redo the shop. So that was under this kind of forward planning fund that we put through. So they've been funded for a year. It's only 8 hours a week, but it's something, especially within the Ullapool area. Everybody's got more than one job, so it was a good enough number of hours to fit around somebody else's job, so they could take one and a different one, and that's eventually what we ended up with. Our collections assistant was at GS, and that just finished on the 1st of April, and we've decided to keep that going at the moment in anticipation of a bigger redevelopment project with our stores, which we anticipate over next winter. So we've absorbed the cost of running that for the next 6 months, and we then anticipate to put in probably a 2-year post within this stores redevelopment and we're moving the stores around, and hopefully we can work that into that funding to give our collection assistant a bit more stability and know that in the next 2 years. But what we would also do within that is, because they've already been with us for a year and had training from Rachel, that the next post that we would put through is not as an entry level one. It's at higher pay. And make sure there's an incentive to keep within it. And I would love to be able to offer all my employees permanent positions, but if I can at least give that wee bit of incentive, go, well, if you stay, the next funding I'll put in, and we'll try and up it to pay that is relevant on your now qualifications or experience, because we already had you for a year as an entry level. So they're both grant funded. Me, I'm not. I'm the only one that's my admissions.
Last question from Liz.
Right, thank you. I've just got a question. It's stimulated by something that Siobhan said about bringing in young people who may stay for about 6 months and then go on to something else, and really what they're learning is a collection of skills. And I was wondering is there any mileage in trying to create some sort of recognised qualification training, perhaps working with museums around Scotland or working with local universities like UHI, to try to create more of this, so we're getting a younger group of people coming into the museums as volunteers, but with the intent of moving on to something else.
I would need to double check on this, but I'm pretty sure there is an MGS apprenticeship scheme that you can do. I think one of the drawbacks on it, which we've not utilised on it, is that they needed to be permanent members of staff to be able to be on it. So I don't know whether that was something that MGS will look at, or I've maybe misread it. Don't hold me to that. But MGS do have some training schemes that you can do for particular posts. I'm not entirely sure of the situations around them. I know we didn't qualify for one, and I can't remember why.
I think it would be a great idea. Absolutely, we could encourage younger people to come in and be part of the museum. We do occasionally get someone from the local high school who's maybe intended to go on and study history or something like that, and they'll be there for a period of time. But they don't walk away with anything specific in terms of skills. They walk away with some inbuilt skills, as you might say. But there's nothing formal at the moment. Anyway, a good idea, though.
I think you're going to have something a bit more to say about the MGS.
I haven't got time to say it.
You haven't? Okay, that's fine. About 4 years ago, we had a younger volunteer who had a degree in history. She was working in front of house at one of the galleries in Edinburgh, and she wanted to secure a job in collections, and the collection side, and what she basically trained for theoretically. And so I said, I'd really like to help. We should maybe sort out a development plan. And then I had a bit of a panic because I couldn't work out what to do. And I met Tamsin at a conference, and I told Tamsin what the story, and she said, well, it's really simple. And it was really simple. So you've got a balance. You've got a volunteer organisation, what the volunteer can get out of the organisation and what the organisation gets out of the volunteer. And hopefully that balance works out. And when you're looking at a development plan for a volunteer, it's what can the organisation do for the volunteer. And so what I basically do, and really straightforward, it's basically a sheet of paper. It says, okay, these are the areas that this volunteer is going to cover over the next 4 months, 6 months, and it will be accessioning using the database. It will be packaging objects. It will be sorting out locations for an object. It'll be doing research either for the museum or for a public inquiry. We get lots of public inquiries, so a combination of those. It will be helping put together an exhibition. And now, if it's a larger exhibition, then she'll be part of that, or he or she will be part of that. Yeah, but we've got a really quite a small cabinet that it stays near our cafe area, and it's got a bit of wall space beside it. And ideally, we get the volunteer with the development plan. This is your cabinet. This is your wall space. You do the exhibition from start to finish, and it will stay up in 2 or 3 months. And just keep it really simple. That's what we do.
Okay, so I'm now going to close this first session of the first day by just reflecting. What I've heard here is so much experience, and there is somebody always in the space that you're in that has been in your shoes, and by having a conversation with them, they can help you take the next steps. So really do make most of the time we've got together today. The next session is our workshop session, and we've got 2 workshops, one being led by David and one being led by me. So if you're with David, you need to stay here, and that's all about succession planning. Is that correct, David?
Kind of.
Good. And if you want to talk more about organisational health, well-being and individual well-being, please follow me into the other space. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you. Big round of applause for our panel.